Welcome to the Big World Made Small podcast for the adventure traveler. I'm thrilled you're here. My name is Jason Elkins, and in addition to being your host, I'm also a former U.S. Army paratrooper, third-generation commercial hot air balloon pilot, paramotor pilot, ex-Montana fly fishing guide, advanced open water scuba diver, and a full-time nomad that's visited more than 30 countries on 6 continents. As a seasoned adventure travel expert with a passion for creating and sharing meaningful experiences, I'm on a quest to impact the lives of adventure travelers, the tour operators they rely on, and the communities that host them. Every week, I bring you exclusive interviews with fascinating adventure tourism experts who have agreed to share their personal stories, favorite destinations, and some invaluable travel insights they've picked up along the way. We'll enjoy a casual conversation, create some connections, and likely share some laughs. It's my hope that by the end of each episode, this big world will feel just a bit smaller. Let's get started, shall we? Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Big World Made Small podcast for the adventure traveler. Today, we've got Lindsey Conroy. She's the owner and lead guide of AdZENtures. Lindsey, first of all, welcome to the show. Happy to have you here.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
So I think we need to touch on the name of your business real quick. Can you spell it out? Because this is a podcast. Spell it out for anybody that's listening and help us kind of figure out where you came up with the name.
Sure. It's AdZENtures, which gets confused 9 times out of 10 with the word adventures. It's AD capital Z, capital E, capital N, TURES. So right smack in the middle of the adventure, we have Zen.
So good opportunity to say, okay, what's your 30-second pitch about your business? And I'm more interested in you as a person, but let's just have this conversation real quick. Kind of 30-second pitch, elevator pitch. What is AdZENtures? And then we're going to go back and talk a little bit about your history, your story, and then I'm sure we'll circle back around to more in-depth conversation about AdZENtures.
Perfect. So AdZENtures is an experiential travel company. We lead mindful experiences around the world with a focus on cultural immersion, adventure sports, pushing people outside of their comfort zone, nature exposure, being outside despite the elements, and wellness, just really focusing in on the various aspects that people can tap into to get to their most peaceful state, their most joyful state, and just feeling alive in the moment and living out their best experience.
Very good. That's a good elevator pitch. And you kind of mentioned everybody gets confused with AdZENtures, adventures, but there's a reason. There's a reason, right? Yes. Ties together. I love that. I think that is super, super cool. So I appreciate you kind of giving us some background on that. Mm-hmm. And the big question is, how did you come up with that? How did you get from where you were to where you are now with AdZENtures? And how far back do you think we need to go to kind of get an understanding of you, Lindsey?
2011 is where kind of the seed started. I started taking yoga after university as just an outlet for physical practice, as well as sort of escaping the corporate world and kind of the rush of my job at the time. I worked in corporate marketing, and it was a lot of hustle and bustle. I was very dedicated to my work and loved it, but it got to be a lot. So a friend of mine recommended I joined a yoga class, and it really didn't interest me much. I'm an athlete for basically my whole life, with a lot more physical. At the time, I thought it was a lot more physically demanding sports. And so yoga to me at the time was very calm and boring and kind of not for me. And I went to my first practice and very quickly learned that I was mistaken and just fell into a kind of an obsession with what it did for me physically and mentally, and paired that with my corporate life. So it was a really nice balance from then, from 2011. Really just every chance I had, I was taking yoga classes, and then I got into trainings and became an instructor myself, and just really went all in and was balancing teaching 7 classes a week with a full-time job and social life and all of that. And that kind of was slowly taking over my interest and my attention. It was this whole world of yoga, but then also the business aspect of it and the community aspect, and how engaging people were in that community, and the different kind of hustle and bustle that it offered in a way that I had not experienced yet.
That's very cool. And before we go any further that direction, I want to ask you just a few questions. You mentioned marketing, corporate marketing. Tell us, where were you living?
I was living in Minnesota. I went to
Okay.
University of Minnesota, and then I'm from Montana originally, went to Minnesota for university, and then had kind of always been exposed to smaller communities and smaller towns. And so I wanted the opportunity to live in the big city of Minneapolis and St. Paul. So I moved there immediately
Okay.
after graduating.
And you were working corporate marketing. Tell us a little bit more about that.
I got a job right out of college at a big corporation, massive corporation, being one of, hundreds of thousands of employees.
What,
And
like 3M? What are we talking about here?
United Health Group.
Okay. All right. The other
Yeah.
big one.
Uh,
Yep. All right.
is very polar opposite of the work that I'm doing now. But
Mm-hmm.
it was very exciting. I got to wear the suit and the fancy shoes and all of that stuff to go to the office and feel very big city compared to the life that I was used to in small town Montana and small town Minnesota for college. And it was very fun to see that aspect of living for a while. And after that, I went to a family corporation also in Minnesota with the understanding that it would be a little more heartfelt work and I would feel more of the community and all of that. But at the end of the day, in my opinion, and in my experience, a corporation was still just that.
It's just that. Did you major in marketing?
I did. I
So
majored in business management and marketing, double major.
what was let's go to the point in time when your friend suggested you go try yoga.
Mm-hmm.
What was your typical day like working marketing? Well, let's go back to a week before you went to your first yoga class. Walk us through what the typical day was doing marketing for a corporation in Minnesota. What did your day look like?
Day was an early start, usually going to the gym early, 5:30 in the morning, and then heading into the office around 7. And, right away at 8:00, I need a little bit of an integration into my day. So the coffee and all of that kind of time to myself. And then 8:00 on, it was meetings and engaging with boards and, this team versus this team. And I was in branding. So we were in the middle of a rebrand for the department that I was working for. So it was going through all of the tedious forms and meeting with every department head and figuring out the proper flow of things. And they were just trying to kind of clean house and go through all of the things that were not necessarily needed anymore and make things more efficient. And so that was very tedious work, speaking to every single person in their department based on what they thought was going to be pertinent going forward. And it was tons of screen time, a lot of engagement with people who knew what they needed and wanted. And then I was kind of the person to take their notes and then implement that change. Mm-hmm. Every 15-minute lunch break, maybe on the way from one meeting to the next, or taking a quick bathroom break to have a snack and then come back to the next meeting. And it was just very rushed going from one thing to the next thing. An introverted extrovert. So I love my people. And as soon as work would end at 5:30, I would be going to an intramural volleyball game or a softball game or something with still a lot of moving parts and a lot of outward energy. And it was great. It filled my cup for sure, but there was never really, if there was an open time in my calendar, I was filling it with something because I just wanted to live this big city life of busy and movement. And it was great. I was, 22 years old and I had the energy for it. So I was very, very excited about that.
I'm curious. I don't know why I'm going to go this direction. We don't have to go this direction, but I'm curious. Are you familiar with the Myers-Briggs personalities? Are you an ENFP or what? Are you?
Yes.
So am I.
How did you know?
Because I am too.
Yeah.
And I can usually pick up on it. So I was just curious. So for any of our listeners, the ENFP, I'll describe myself. I'm not describing you. I shouldn't have set it up this way. But yeah, going kind of need to engage, need to have things happening, kind of the shiny object syndrome a little bit. It's once I learn something, once I kind of figure out how to do something, I pretty much lose interest in it. I'm okay, ready to go on to the next thing, which I can imagine that in that corporate environment can potentially feed a lot of those needs because a lot of things going on. But at the same time, I think for me, I can also get burnt out of it. It's I go too hard. And part of the other reason I asked is I remember watching a video that someone had done on YouTube talking about jobs that you would think would be good for ENFPs, but are not. And the number one mistake was marketing. ENFPs tend to think they should go into marketing, I guess, according to this person. And then they started talking about the word tedious, which you used. It's the reality of marketing can be quite tedious. And looking screen time and looking at spreadsheets and analytics and stuff like that can be a challenge. Now, of course, for anybody that's listening to this and is aware of it, Big World Made Small is also adventure travel marketing. That's what I really do. But fortunately, it's my own business, so I get to decide what I want to do. I've already pretty much decided Google Analytics is probably not for me, or the website design. Give me a website and let me have free reign with it, and then finish it, and then move on to the next one. I'm good with that. So
yeah.
Does that kind of resonate with your experience 100%. A little bit?
100%. For me, the experience of working in corporate, it was exciting because there was always new things to try to hit one goal. And it was always a sales goal, always monetary and financial driven and focused and all of these things, which was fine because a business is a business. And I know that from my education and experience as well. I think what got so frustrating was that it was the same kind of thing over and over with a little bit of a different lens. And then once we achieved a goal that we'd been working so hard to make, then it was like, okay, now let's just double it for next year, doing all the same things. And it was like, what?
Sounds so familiar.
Yeah. I don't know. It was, I slowly got into some of the product development side of things because there was some shifts in the teams, and that was amazing because we got to go into the product development and bringing it to market. And I like to think that what I really should have focused on and where I think my strong suit was really creative problem solving. And so, tell me where the issue is and we'll dissect every single angle until we solve the problem, and then let's solve it and then let's move on, as opposed to solve it and then stay in this cycle of optimizing it and, reframing the message and things like that, where I love the idea of here's a puzzle and then solve it in unique ways. And one of the best classes I had at university was this management course where it was creative thinking. And it was basically 18 levels of why. So answer the question, ask why, answer that question, ask why. And I just was like, this is amazing.
They also call unpeeling the onion or something, go layer after layer until you really get to, that's, yeah.
Yeah.
Did you, I guess what I want to ask is, so yoga wasn't necessarily on your radar before that point. You mentioned you grew up in Montana. I grew up actually very, very close to where you grew up in northern Wyoming.
Oh, nice.
I'm curious did you aspire to travel? Was that on your radar? Did you ever think you wanted to do something like this, or?
Not growing up. Growing up, we did a ton of camping trips. Everything we did was outside. So that's kind of where that element is ingrained in me. But everything was within the state or very, very nearby. And so when I got old enough and was starting to think about college, I really took that as my one and only chance of living outside of Montana, because I knew Montana was where I wanted to be long term. And I thought, hey, this is 4 years, where I can go somewhere else. And then I'm coming home after that lovely experience of something different for just that short period of time. And then when I left...
Why Minnesota? I'm just curious. Was it just the schools specifically? Because I know there's a bit of a connection between Minnesota and Montana. It's not super close, but I know that happens.
For me, I was in love with the Four Seasons, so I had to go somewhere where that was still the case. And then also I went for sports. So I was a volleyball player, a competitive volleyball player my whole life, and then had the opportunity to go to a smaller Division III school in Minnesota to play. And so for me, it was a no-brainer. I got to go to a small liberal arts school where I wouldn't be in a huge state school. I can be a little shy around crowds. So I was like, that can be great. And then being a part of a team always makes me feel a lot more confident and equipped to excel. And so being a part of a team, going to a smaller school in a different place where there are still the same comforts of home or similarities of home, that it didn't feel so foreign to me, that felt like a very exciting but safe choice.
Did you miss Billings?
No, I did not. It was a very, very good move.
I mean, I'm sure you missed your family. We want them to listen to the show, but
yeah, I missed family. I missed the mountains.
Yeah.
But I got lakes in exchange. So the summers, my eyes were opened up to lake life and what that can be like. And, not these glacial lakes that I'm used to in Montana or the freezing cold rivers. So that was a very different lifestyle that I very quickly fell in love with in being in Minnesota. But just loved it. And the people were so warm and welcoming, and everything about my experience in Minnesota was just 10 out of 10.
Okay. Other than the camping and the outdoor stuff, which is quite common if you're growing up in that part of the world. You said you hadn't really traveled much out of the state or anything,
Mm-mm.
but was there anything you remember that might have been like, when you look back at it, like, oh, like, so for example, I've had a few guests on the show that are like, I had this eccentric grandparent or uncle or somebody that used to travel and send me postcards.
Mhm.
And at the time I didn't think much of it, but now that I'm working in the tourism business, I can look back and say, oh, geez, maybe they're, so was there anybody like that you think in hindsight might have played a role in this other than just the person that suggested you go to a Zoom class or not a
You
Zoom
know,
class? I'm sorry, Zoom, a
yoga.
yoga class. Yeah.
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 It wasn't a human. It was an experience itself that kind of happened because it had to. So I went to this liberal arts school in Minnesota and had decided early on that I wanted these two majors to equip myself to go into the workforce in 4 years. And in order to do so, because I was at a liberal arts school, they required a language credit. And in order to get all of my courses in 4 years for a double major, I had to do study abroad in order to get that language requirement. And so I was forced to spend 6 weeks between my first and second year of college in Spain. And that was the first time I ever went overseas. That was the first time I'd ever been in a culture that wasn't familiar to me. And it rocked my whole world.
But I want to ask you, were you excited about it? Because I kind of heard you say I was forced.
Yeah.
I needed to do this. It sounds like you didn't even want to go.
I mean, it was kind of fun, but it was not anything that I would have chosen to do had I not been required to do it for study.
Okay.
It just felt so foreign to me. And from I've always been somewhat outgoing in my own way. Like the setting had to be right, but wasn't afraid of much as far as new experiences. But this just really wasn't something that I was into. I didn't view international travel as something that was going to be the biggest part of my life.
Right.
And everyone else was fairly excited to go, but no one was like, oh my gosh, we're going to study abroad. This is amazing. And it seemed very transactional for a lot of us. And then everybody who went, I mean, most people that I went on that course with, there were 15 of us from my university. We all lived with a host family, so we weren't together. We lived with complete strangers. We were immersed in the culture. It wasn't comfortable. It was just, authentic to the most that it could have ever been. And it was life-changing. I mean, within a week, everybody was going out to discotecas to see what this is like, and then eating dinner at 10 o'clock, which was so foreign to me. And the kind of food they were eating and just the way of life. We would be very on time at our class at 8 a.m. and our instructor would walk in at 8:45 with her cafe and her, croissant and her cigarette. And she'd be chatting on, to a friend. And we're all sitting there like, what the heck? You're the one who's like our teacher. Like, you're not even on time. And she was like, oh, relax. Like, it's fine. Everybody was just absolutely floored of this way of life that we at our university would be. I mean, you'd be kicked out of the class. You wouldn't be welcome back if it happened more than once. And I mean, it was such an eye opener of how things can function so beautifully and so wonderfully and it be so different. It was the first time I realized that, oh, wow, there's tangibly way more than one way of doing things. And this was so opposite of what I was used to. It was exhilarating.
How long were you there or how long after that did you think, oh, I want to go have an experience like that again? Or did that come later on?
Immediately.
I
didn't want to leave. Everybody had such a hard time leaving. There were tears, there were hugs, and we were going back to the same place. Like there were 15 of us who went together, had all the same courses together, experienced a lot of the same things. And then we went back to the same university together, but we were all just in tears because we knew it wouldn't be this kind of experience or this kind of life. And we were all so grateful for that. And that was luckily between my freshman and my sophomore year of university. And then immediately I applied for another study abroad program the following year. And that was the deciding factor that I want to see as many different places around the world as possible and just have all of these experiences that were so fulfilling to me in a way that nothing ever was.
Yeah,
even sports.
I love it.
And for me, sports were like the best.
I love that. Where did you go the second time?
Australia.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah.
So somebody that grew up in a very similar type of place where, we have differences, but, I can kind of relate, having grown up in northern Wyoming. And I've been traveling a lot since then. You're obviously working in the travel business. What I think of is like Europeans that live in Europe and can go to a different country quite easily. And they're just so much more like open to just traveling usually. You get the gap year students or just people will just save up enough money and then quit their job and go travel for a year. It's like pretty common with the Europeans. And I think what you kind of said about it's like kind of outside of our world sometimes when we grow up in the US, especially if it's in the Midwest or in the West. And I don't know, I mean, does that resonate with your experience?
Absolutely.
What's your take on it? I'm not sure where I'm going with that.
Well, it was, as you're speaking, it just, my head started to think like, it's just freedom. Like for us, since I was little, we're the free country, we're free to be what we want, the American dream, all these things. But that was the first time I was really like, this is freedom, in my opinion. It was, you can go out and you can do, and part of it might've been an age thing as well at the time, but I had already been at university by myself for a year before I had gone to Spain.
When you were probably like 18 or 19?
Yeah. I was 19 years old.
That's the other side of it, right? Do you want to go into that?
Yeah, that was the other part. Although the family that I was living with was like, you will not do it was not the best experience with the family, actually. It was horrible, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, let's unpack that.
Yeah.
Why?
I mean, and that's just another part that reinforces how amazing this experience was in all of its like gruesome, bare bones kind of like non-fairy tale-esque experience. Like I didn't go abroad and have the time of my life and meet a Prince Charming and, like get swept up. It was like, I literally got yelled at every day by my host mother. I got, blackmailed by this little sister that I had who was sneaking into my room when I was at school, like tattling on me to her mom because I was supposed to be home the night before, not going to a discoteca. And she found my little digital camera back in 2006 or whatever, and went through the photos and showed her mom. And then I got home and got a verbal lashing in Spanish that I couldn't understand and was told that I can't go do these things. And what is happening right now? I don't even know you. Like, what's going on? But,
but it still was a profound, life-changing experience that you wanted more of. Maybe not exactly like that.
I think that whole experience to me was like, because I had traveled before with my family, and when we traveled the way a lot of people do that I know. And we went to a resort and everything was very comfortable. And if we wanted the same cereal we had back home, we could get that. And, it was the same comforts of home in a new place. And I think for me, this experience was none of the comforts of home. No one was being polite to me because I was a guest in their house. Like it was the way that this mother mothered. I was in her home and I was going to follow her rules. And that was that. And it kind of like shocked me how this system worked over there. And I loved it because it was so new. It wasn't comfortable and I didn't enjoy every experience, but the overarching theme of it, or the message or the learning I had, was so profound that it was, even through all of that discomfort, you can have such an eye-opening experience where you get to know yourself, you feel empowered, you are just aware of different ways that people live their life, and whether you like it or not isn't the point. It's, I don't have to live my life that way, but to experience someone else's way of living was very, very exciting.
Well, there's something just happens, it's that growth is on the other side of comfort, or discomfort, depending on how you want to put it. And sometimes it sucks. Like, I was in the Army, I was in the infantry in the Army. And I remember, I spent 6 months away one summer.
Yeah.
Or 6 weeks, actually longer than that. And it sucked. I mean, it was not pleasant at all. And I can look back at it now and say, wow, look at that, opened up a whole new world of opportunities and ideas, and just being with a bunch of guys from all over the country and just going through that experience. Do I want to do it again exactly like that? No, but it did make me want to connect with people from other places more, so it's all, and that which does not kill you only makes you stronger. Right. All right. Very, very cool. Was the family situation a little bit better in Australia?
That we got to live on our own. Okay. That was all students. So that was a little more chaotic in a different way, but we were in a big dorm on the coast of, on the west coast of Australia, just having the time of our lives.
Yeah, no, that sounds like fun. All right. So so that I can see so you did all this in school, and then you go back, corporate job, crushing it every day, getting up early, doing all this stuff. Then yoga came into your life, and it sounds like kind of overtook your life.
Yeah, it did.
Let's talk about that.
It was starting, I was drawn to this experience of, picking up classes wherever I could. And whenever there was an opening in a schedule, I would jump to the opportunity to teach and be more involved in my community as far as the yoga studio was concerned. And it didn't take away from my job at all, but it made me want to be there less.
Mm-hmm.
I was drawn to this other place when I was at my current corporate job. And I was offered a management job at the studio that I was teaching at. And because of the lifestyle I had kind of made for myself financially, I couldn't afford to switch from a corporate job to a yoga studio manager. And that kind of got me thinking, like, what do I really want out of my life? Like, that would have been a very fulfilling job for me, but financially I couldn't do it. And I wasn't at a point where I could just switch everything right away to make that happen. And
you remember when you mentioned the sense of freedom when you went to Spain, even though you've got the wicked stepmother or whatever, and at that point, it occurred to me, like, we build our own prisons, right, around us, whatever that is. And maybe that's the corporate, and they're more than happy to help us do it, aren't they?
Yeah.
Encouraging you to go, you should buy a car. You've done such a good job. Yeah. Here's your quarterly bonus. Make sure you go buy a car, put the down payment down, and make sure your payments are at least $600 a month so you can never leave.
Yes.
Yeah. So
So it was one of those things, my dad, instilled in me a very smart and savvy financial progress or planning, I guess. And so I was paying off all my loans at the fastest rate possible throughout my corporate career, so I would have no debt. And then basically once I got to that point, it was a big celebration, mainly because I was out of debt, but then also because that kind of allowed me this freedom to choose. And at that point, I kind of had this epiphany. It was winter in Minnesota and I was driving to work, and I woke up. Mondays were my most difficult day because I had this whole week of something that I wasn't really lit up about. I was interested in it and I was good at it, but it didn't light me up. And I got in my car for a 2-hour commute because of the snow. And I was just like looking at hundreds of other people on the road by me, just wondering, like, is this really what I'm going to do for the next, 40 years, is just do something that I'm not lit up about and sit in traffic. And, I just saw minutes of my life slipping away. And that kind of made me really anxious about, like, I need to change something fast. And I don't know what it is, but this is not sustainable for me. And so I wanted to open a studio of my own and I had this vision, and I was like, oh, this is going to be so great. It's going to be different than what's offered here. But I'd only ever had exposure to one kind of community within the yoga space, and that was in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I tried a bunch of different yoga studios, but ultimately they were the exact same with a little bit of a different cover, in my opinion. And so I felt like, in order to really differentiate myself, which was needed for a successful business based on my background, that I needed a bigger pool to pull from as far as, like, things that I wanted to incorporate into my studio. And so I'd been putting all of this money aside for a while to do a capital loan towards a studio space in St. Paul. And rather than doing that, I decided to go on an around the world trip and do a research and development year.
I love it.
Meeting with all of these different communities and kind of... You
are an ENFP.
Yeah, a little bit.
I'm doing the digital nomad life. I get it.
Yeah. A friend of mine had done it. He I can't remember his profession at the moment, but it was something where he worked a little bit, and then before going to the big game, he took a year off and he did an around the world trip. And like you mentioned, for Europeans, this is a gap year. This is super common. Lots of people do it at different stages in their life. And he had done it. And all of us kind of in the friend group were like, what is he doing? Like, he's going to lose so much momentum. Like, you're going to miss out on a whole year before going back to work. Who's going to hire him? Like, all these things. And so that was always in the back of my mind. And I met with him a couple of times, just say, like, where did you start? What did you do? How did you, what should I expect? All these things. And ended up drafting this template and used Google for like a month straight to create a spreadsheet of all of these different contacts at yoga studios around the world.
Mm-hmm.
I said, basically, whoever responds, that's how I'm going to map out my trip. And so I got probably like 80% response rate, people, wide open arms, come and teach. Like, oh, and if you need somebody, a couch to sleep on, like so-and-so has an extra bed. If you want to make some money under the table, you can teach for us here. You can meet with the owner, you can meet with the marketing manager, you can, do some volunteer work for my friend who owns a bar if you need some traveling money. I mean, it was the most welcoming feeling I've ever had from complete strangers because we had this one commonality of yoga, and it was thrilling. I was like, oh my gosh, I have all of these different things to choose from. So from there, I just got to pick all of my favorite destinations that I'd wanted to see or started researching and thought that might be interesting. And I drafted 11 months worth of stops and places to teach versus bucket list destinations where friends were going to come and meet me along the way, and spent 11 and a half months on that journey doing some research and development with a couple of journals and binders that are like this big with, this is the decor. This one had a cafe. This one served food. This one had this payment plan. This one marketed to their students like this, like anything about the studios, whether it was logistics or cultural or design or business, anything that I could get out of people, I documented.
I'm curious, did you at that time consider maybe doing a blog as you go as a marketing person? Was that on the radar?
Yeah, it was on the radar. This was like, Instagram was starting to get out there, but there weren't really influencers at this point that I had known of. And so I started a blog, and the blog was so sad.
Okay, we don't have to discuss if you don't want.
But was not motivated, and I was traveling with this horrible iPad, like the worst thing ever. So to try to do things like on this iPad on a WordPress site, it was just a nightmare. So I think I have like 10 posts in a year of travel, and it was the bane of my existence. I was like, people would, write me an email from back home, and I'd be like, I don't want to do this.
Yeah, I don't think I could either, to be honest with you, because I've been traveling almost 3.5 years full time. I don't think I could actually sit down with any sort of consistency and create blog posts. I can do podcast episodes like 3 or 4 a week, because I just get to sit down and have a conversation. My computer is doing most of the work. We're just having a conversation. The computer's recording it. AI will give me a transcript.
Yeah.
I just need, hopefully I don't have to edit anything, and I can just upload it to the podcast platform. I mean, there's a little bit more to it than that, but yeah, I'm with you. I think, and even when people say, oh, I'm going to go somewhere, I'll make sure you take pictures.
Yeah.
And I've noticed I'm not very good at that. If I'm with somebody special, I tend to take pictures for some reason, but I've noticed when I go by myself, well, the only reason I would take pictures is to share it with someone. And if I'm with somebody, I'm sharing it with them. So it's like, I don't know where I'm going with that, but anyway.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same for me. Like when I'm traveling, I'm in it, know, and I think that it's a very special skill to be able to document and be in it at the same time. And that is something that I have not developed in all of my years.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's always like, how can you? Because I've been a lot of cool places. I've taken some cool pictures. And when I go to show people my cool pictures, it's like, I'm almost embarrassed. I'm like, no, this is not what it was like. I'm like, I don't even want to show you because it's cool to me, but it's not going to be that cool to you. Yeah. So it's like, what's the point? It's almost a disappointment to try and convey something to someone, an experience you had to convey it to someone else. Yeah. They're always going to be disappointed unless you've got a really, really good cheerleader in your life. Yes. I haven't met anybody like that yet. Yeah, it's tricky for sure. So unfortunately, I mean, my travel journal, the diary or journal I kept throughout that year is amazing. And it's like a little scrapbook with, tickets here and program taped into the front here and tickets from ferries and all of these different things. And that it's gorgeous. It's like one of my most pretty cool possessions. Yeah. And it's just for you. I mean, I'm sure you've sat down and flipped through it with somebody and shared some memories, but really it's like, that's pretty cool because it's something that means something to you. And I'm curious to hear where this is going. So you spent a year, you got all these journal notes, met all of these places, did a product development trip, basically. Yes, exactly. For a tour company. All of this year being done and never, ever, this idea that this was going to be a part of it. It was all this to frame up a brick and mortar back in Minnesota. And my dad came to visit me when I was in month 8.
I think. And we got to talking and he was like, like he's a commercial realtor in the South. And he was like, you should really start talking to some people if you're coming back and wanting to, get to work starting in January, February about a space. And I just like, my heart absolutely sank for the first time in 8 months. And I'd never really pieced that together at that point. I was fully committed still to this idea of going back. And that was the whole intention of this trip. And then when he verbalized this like grounding, yes, of like physical grounding in one location. And I knew, I had interviewed so many business owners prior to going on this trip as well, and had been around small businesses on side jobs and whatnot. And I know the financial and time commitment it takes to run a small business, a startup. And my heart again just sank thinking about being in this place, one place, completely immersed and grounded for at least 3 years was my
assumption. Well, did you run into did some of these studio managers flat out say, I wish I wouldn't have got a studio. I wish I was doing what you're doing right now?
Yeah. they, a lot of the feedback I got from the managers and the owners, the ones who were financially liable for these places, were you don't understand how big of a financial stress it is. Like even the laundry bill is like, debilitating if you lose a couple of members 1 month. And it really is this high stress situation unless you franchise. And, you're always competing to have people stay, and you promote the teachers because then if the teacher leaves, then the students are loyal to the teacher and you'll lose them. Do you, all these different ways of running a business, which I wanted to learn, and I did, and that was great insight. But really knowing that I was going to be going back to Minnesota, and I had a little bit of a differentiator. I wanted to have a little cafe on the first floor, a beautiful yoga studio with panoramic views on the second, and then like a couple rooms on the third, to make it like a live-in for travelers or whatever.
Oh, okay.
And so that was kind of the vision to begin with. And so I did, meet with hostels and, pensiones and little farm stays and things like that along the way. But then again, this idea of like being in one place, even though it was a vision and a dream of mine, that was a completely different way that I'd been living from the last 8 months. And that year was the first year I felt really in like a flow state. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of where we start to tie all this together, where the business came from, because I was, connected with all of these locals from all over the world. I'd had these amazing experiences that you can't get anywhere else because locals were telling me what to do, where to eat, what not to do, where not to go. All the tourists go to this place, but that restaurant is really not that great. Instead, go to this one. This is where we're all going to go after our studio meeting. Come with us. And I got an immersive look at every location because of the locals. And I was like, gosh, this is such an amazing way to travel. And I tried couch surfing a couple of times, which was sketchy.
I've heard some stories.
Yes. And then I did some Airbnbs when it was still when it was still the original idea, and staying with a local in their space. And then they showed us around, and that was amazing. So again, just like, it was being revealed to me, this way of travel that I had never really gotten a positive experience from because of the Spain thing. And so this was a different way of experiencing a place from a local with best results. And I was just starting to think like, the whole time I was traveling, I did yoga for myself and anybody I met along the way in hostels or whatever. I was like, oh, I'm just going to go practice in the park. I need to stretch. I slept on a super uncomfortable bed. They're like, oh, can we join you? I'm like, for sure. Great. Like, come on. I've been teaching yoga at this point for 5 years now, and was able to lead some pop-up yoga classes for friends that I met along the way. And it was such a heartfelt way of living, like just going through meeting people organically, then go on this hike, and then we'll do a little yoga afterwards, and then talk to the local who recommended this place. And it was such an in-depth experience of every location that it didn't feel topical. It felt like I was super ingrained in that space and got to learn about various ways of living and communities, and some for better, some for worse. But I still had that knowledge, that authenticity that was for me eye-opening and priceless. So It started to turn the wheels of, if I'm not going to go have a brick and mortar, how can I portray this experience to people without them having to leave their job for a year, their life for a year?
Yep.
And then thus began month 8, a way that I could kind of craft this into like a pop-up or a traveling studio, and what that would look like, and does that exist, and how people would take
Do you remember that moment when like that there was a, oh geez, maybe this is the thing? Do you remember a specific moment?
Yeah, I was in Slovenia. So I'd already seen my dad. He kind of told me this. It started to get my head down this idea of maybe not having a brick and mortar and what else that would look like, and how I can turn this amazing year into something that a different version of what I had hoped it would be, a discovery year of something. And I ended up in Slovenia by happenstance. My brother came to visit me in Croatia. We ended up leaving because of too many people and very, very touristic, and just absolutely followed people's recommendations. We hitchhiked a couple times. We just asked people, where should we go? And then we ended up in this little village. And I mean, it was the most serendipitous thing that's ever happened to me. I came across this hostel. They needed help. The first night I stayed there, I stayed in a dorm room. The next night I was on staff and was just absolutely fallen in love with this place. It was a tiny little village in the middle of these Slovenian Alps, mountains everywhere. And it was an adventure mecca. Like people were out hiking, paddling, climbing, cycling, every kind of adventure sport you could imagine. And I had been backpacking for like a week and a half or something. And I asked my friend if anyone was doing Pilates or yoga or body work in their garage or in their basement or attic or something. And she said, no, but if you know anyone, let me know. She said it kind of sarcastically. And I was like, well, actually, I'm a yoga teacher. And she was like, oh my gosh, I can get at least 6 people together who want to practice yoga. And so we started doing this on the lawn in Slovenia. Long story short, I ended up staying there for 8 weeks, started a yoga program, slowly, organically built a class there with the support of the hostel owner who was helping me market. And that's the only place in all of my travels that there wasn't a yoga offering within 50 miles.
Okay.
I couldn't believe it because it's such an adventure
Interesting
place. And it was very
And the
needed.
hostel owner obviously knew that there was demand when she said, oh, if you know somebody, let me know. Because people have been asking her.
Yes,
hey,
exactly.
Yeah, okay. Interesting.
So I hung out there for 8 weeks and it was time for me to move on to my next place. And I just really couldn't bring myself to leave. It was really, really difficult. And I wanted to, my family had heard everything about Slovenia in a matter of 8 weeks. All of my friends had heard. And I just said, like, wouldn't it be fun if people could come here and experience the things that I got to? We'll all do the yoga and then they can do all of these other fun things. And so that kind of was the official kickoff of like, let's make this happen.
All right.
Yeah.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
That's quite inspirational. And what did your dad think when you decided not to go buy a building?
He's always been supportive, let's say. He was a little disappointed. He was disappointed when I didn't go back to Montana after college. He was disappointed when I decided not to buy a brick and mortar, especially because I decided that Slovenia was going to be my business base. So I moved back to the US in December at the end of that year, opened my LLC and started doing some local events with everything being outdoor yoga in the community, and got a lot of traction and enough to start promoting this business idea. And I did a lot of research.
Help me understand that. Sorry to interrupt you. When you say I started doing these events, you mentioned outdoor specifically, started to get enough traction. I'm imagining if you want to have a business that takes people on these trips and cool places, you probably need to figure out how do I get in front of those people. So is that what you mean by these events? Maybe it's a free event in the park. You're going to get a bunch of people that come out that are really into yoga. They get to know you and then they figure out what you're doing. They get on your mailing list so you can send them. Okay. Is that kind of the gist of it?
That's exactly it.
Okay.
My sales funnel basically started with small, like bite-sized events that combine yoga and outdoors, or yoga and some sort of adventure sport, because in my year abroad, there were 4 commonalities or 4 things that really stood out for me as far as the experience was concerned. And it was yoga or wellness, being exposed to nature in a really raw way. So even if I'm in the middle of a torrential rain pour, I'm still going to experience this beautiful lake or whatever it is. And then adventure sports. So I tried a lot of things that really put me outside of my comfort zone. And like you'd said, growth comes from the other side of discomfort. And I really, really stepped into a lot of my strengths after doing those challenging things. And And then the biggest one is cultural immersion, just learning so much about myself and others through that. I wanted to take these 4 experiences and then break them down and provide little bite-sized offerings to people within the community. So we did yoga and stand-up paddleboarding, and we did yoga and breakfast tacos, because in Austin, Texas, where I was living at the time, because my brother lived there. So my re-entry back was to stay with someone familiar in a place that, with family and friends and things like that. So breakfast tacos is a huge part of Austin. So I'd offer breakfast tacos and then yoga. And then we would do rooftop yoga on a Sunday afternoon with mimosas after the yoga, and little things like this that basically the intention was to get people into yoga through other things.
Okay.
So I had been hesitant to start yoga because I didn't think it was for me. And I thought other people might be experiencing that same situation. So dangle breakfast tacos in front of somebody and then say, and we'll do a little bit of stretching. Then they come and they see that yoga is not so intimidating. It's, available for all levels, and it doesn't have to be something scary that is for this, group, isolated a group over here.
Is that why they do goat yoga to kind of...
I don't know why goat yoga exists. No shade to anybody who does goat yoga who might be listening.
I went and did it once just because it was probably the first time. No, it wasn't the first time.
They're the cutest thing. And I would be so happy to go to a petting zoo and hold baby goats. I would pay for that.
That's pretty much what it was.
Yeah.
My experience was, I don't remember actually anybody showing us any poses. I think we just went there and we got on our belly and let the goats walk on our backs, and it was like, okay, it was, they were cute, but it was not yoga.
Yeah. And I think I have just a very strict no feces rule in my yoga session.
Reasonable.
So goat yoga's out. Yeah.
All right. So you're not going to do that. All right. No. But I love what you're saying about, though, is because when you first said, your friend, oh, you should go to yoga. Mm-hmm. You were into other sports. If maybe it had been phrased as, hey, we're going to get to play together and play volleyball and then stretch for a little bit afterwards, you'd probably been like, I'm in.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Because in my experience, people's opinion of yoga is either it's too hard, it's not for them, I'm not flexible, I shouldn't do it, or it's so boring. I don't that's not for me. My time can be better spent elsewhere. And I was in each of those camps at one point. And then I experienced it for myself, and yoga can be so many things that it really is for everyone. And you might not love it, but it'll benefit you in some way. And it might not ever be something that's I'm super into yoga.
You might not become an instructor and want to build a studio.
Yeah. But I believe that it does benefit everybody. It can benefit everyone in one way or another, whether it's the mental, physical, spiritual, any of the above and many more things. And so kind of a little trickery, but just luring people in to see if it resonates. And I would say 95% of my students are brand new to yoga when I've done these little experiences.
That's interesting.
So we would get travelers, tourists, people coming into town to do something fun and different. And then they would see this listing on, Airbnb Experience or Eventbrite or whatever. And they'd say, well, that's something fun that we can all do, like breakfast tacos. That's cool. We're in Austin and that's such a thing. It comes with yoga, I guess. So whatever, but we're out hiking a trail and exposed to, a beautiful part of Austin. And
you're right. Because if you go on, Airbnb Experiences or any of those platforms and yoga class, great. You might get some yoga people.
Yeah.
But you're not going to create it. Here's what I'm thinking. And I'm curious if it resonates. If I put out a yoga class and I get yoga people to come do my yoga class, there's no big deal. We go to yoga class all the time. What kind of a connection am I going to create with Lindsey? She's a great yoga instructor, and we just signed up for a yoga class. We don't need anything more. But somebody that's gets exposed to something new that they enjoy, and you're the one who is responsible.
Yeah.
You're their guide. You're the one that turns them on to this idea of yoga, meditation, spiritual, whatever. Then that's a different level of connection. And then when you say, hey, do you want to go to Slovenia with me?
Yeah. And I mean, I think the biggest thing for me, my biggest frustration from previous studios that I'd worked with and what I experienced abroad was the different kind of engagement that you're allowed outside of a US studio. And that is a total generalization. I don't mean that for everything because I haven't been to every studio, but help
me understand that. I must have missed something there.
So my experience was class starts at 6, right? So you show up at 5:45, you lay your mat out, you go change in the locker room, come back to your mat, and it's a quiet space. It's a meditative space. People are respectful, not to be too noisy. Maybe you're whispering to the friend that you came with or somebody that you see every week at the same class.
Mm-hmm.
You have an hour long, for some people, transformative experience. Very, very intentional for a lot of people. There's a lot of magic that can happen in that studio space. You lay down at the very end and relax and soak up all that great energy from the whole room. And then you leave. You get in your car
Mm-hmm.
and you leave. Or
Mm-hmm.
the friend that you came to the class with, you two have to now decide, where do we go get coffee? We both drove. I live this way, you live that way. Where's in the middle? Okay, but I'm cold. I need to shower first. It'll take me 15 minutes. Da 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 da.
Okay.
And in overseas, it was this nice experience of like, they had a little teeth thing there. There wasn't this like the teacher has to rush to their next class and there's a 10-minute changeover. So you have to get the heck out of the studio, clear out space for the next group coming in. And that to me was a big, big miss in the market of like connection. And there was never this opportunity to talk to the instructor who just conducted this amazing experience for me and for 20 other people. And I didn't have the opportunity or the place to engage with the other 20 people in the room about what we just experienced. And so with these activities that I was offering, you know, we would do a yoga session and then we would sit and have tacos and get to talk about it. And people
Mm-hmm.
would get to say like, oh, well, I felt really weird in this shape. Like that was, you know, interesting, but I didn't think that I could do this and I did it. Like that was kind of fun. And it gave them a super safe space to ask questions, to engage, to talk about their experience. And then they realized like that was yoga. That's what I was so scared about, or that's what I didn't think was for me, when really it was just a little bit of moving, a little bit of breathing, and I feel better.
Cool.
Yeah.
And you've created that connection, because I think connection is probably the big thing about the type of travel that we're talking about, these type of experiences about it, is creating a connection. So yeah, I could see trying to sell like a group trip at a regular yoga studio in the US.
Yeah.
Good luck. I don't know. I have no idea what I'm talking about. But based on this conversation with you, I'm envisioning an event that, you know, tacos and yoga, and we're all going to sit around afterwards and eat some tacos and maybe even have a shot of tequila or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
I could see then like, oh, by the way, you know, I do this travel thing. We're going to Slovenia. We're going here. We're going there. And it's like, you've got a connection. It makes sense.
Yeah.
That I'm happy we had this conversation, because I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
We've tried to veer away from just the yoga as the initial like onboarding. Mm-hmm. So that is an element for sure, but you know, leading hiking groups, and my partner, he's a hunter. So he wants to lead like hunting courses where, you know, you have physical fitness in the morning so you can carry, you know, your equipment up the mountain, and cooking classes and this and that, and everything that kind of comes uniquely to a certain destination, we try to incorporate. So this has evolved to a place where yoga is definitely an aspect of it, but it's not the focus. Yes, in 2016, we used that as like the onboarding for the sales funnel. But since then, we've kind of, and it's still an element of that, but we've evolved to offering other things that draw people in, like hiking groups.
Yeah, I can see a lot of different ways of doing that. Is anything that's not go to the studio 10 minutes before your class starts and then hurry up and get out the door because the next group is coming.
Yeah.
I can see where that would not work. Mm-hmm. I worked in the fly fishing industry, and there was a lot of that was, you know, just the social connection in the shop. People come into the fly shop and we have these conversations. We help them. If they need it, we'll go out in the grass and help them learn a new casting thing or whatever. It's just, you create that connection. And then when you're like, yeah, I'm going to Belize next week, or, you know, in a few months, you've got that connection with people. Mm-hmm. So I can see that. So where do you live now?
Now I'm half the year in Austin, Texas, and half the year in Slovenia.
You're doing that. Okay. All right. Very cool. I don't know why I want to ask you this, but I'm curious. Is there a book that you just think kind of ties into some of this conversation we've been having, kind of around comfort zones and Zen? And like, I thought of when we first started chatting, I was like, oh, I read the Zen of motorcycle maintenance. I can't even say it. The Zen of motorcycle maintenance. Have you ever read that?
No.
I'm a little older than you. It's an older book, but it ties some of this stuff all together in the story of this guy. It is a long time ago, but I think he was riding motorcycle cross country, and so maybe that's one to check out. But I was curious if you have any books that, for somebody that's like, I don't really know much about yoga, I don't really know much about what they're talking about, but is there something like Eat, Pray, Love might be the type of thing that somebody might say? I'm not suggesting that this has anything to do with Eat, Pray, Love.
Yeah, I don't know.
What?
I don't know that I've read it yet. If there is one, I don't know that I have one.
Okay.
That's
I was just curious if anything popped to mind that you'd be like, yeah, this might get somebody inspired to, I mean, obviously your website, obviously this conversation, that's why we're having this conversation, is to inspire someone to go read a book.
I think that it's interesting because my yoga background is inspired by a bunch of different teachers that I've had along the way.
Mm-hmm.
And there's every different background that you can imagine. So it's very hodgepodgey. So I would say, I mean, I can send a list of my favorite resources from yoga.
No, I was just curious if something kind of popped into your head, and probably only because that book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, popped into my head. So I guess I just wanted to know if you knew the book. But
I don't know the book, but I'm going to read it now.
I might have to read it again because, it might be related. It might not.
Yeah, check it out.
So you've got a variety. So let's real quick make sure our listeners know, what do your trips look like? Like what do they need to know about what you guys are doing on your trips and how? I mean, obviously we're going to have a link to your website, so people are going to go look at that. It's a great website. And what else do you want them to know before we wrap it up? Maybe there's a question or two I should have asked that I forgot to.
No, you're good. I think along with the value proposition or the 30-second pitch at the very beginning, like the biggest thing that we tout, I guess, is the cultural immersion. And so our retreat destinations are chosen based on where we have a personal connection, a close friend, a family member, someone who has lived in that location or is from that location, and they understand our business. So we never just pick like, oh, we want to go to Belize, we're going to have a retreat there, because quite frankly, travel agents and, people who've been working in that market for a lot longer than we have been can provide a self-guided, much less expensive experience for people who want to go there. So for us, we pick a destination where we have insider knowledge based on what we offer our guests. And the whole thing is walking away with a really in-depth view of what it's like in that place to live. So in Scotland, you walk away from the Scottish Highlands being like, okay, that's life in the Scottish Highlands.
I get it. Or
and in Portugal,
if you go to Spain, you got to live with a woman that yells at you just to make sure you get the full experience.
A little more comfortable than that. So where there are added elements of comfort, the intention is not to have.
We don't need to make them super uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's not what I say is we don't have an American experience in Spain. We have a Spanish experience for guests.
Without the yelling.
Yes, without yelling.
Because we did talk about growth comes from, and what you got out of the experience, but I'm sure that your guests probably don't want to think that they're going to have to be miserable.
Yeah.
Grounded. They're going to be able to go out to the discotheque if they want.
Yeah.
So is it all or mostly, I heard you use the word retreats. Is it mostly group trips, retreats with the group, or are you able to set up kind of a private departures as well? Okay.
We offer 3 different programs. So one is where we set the dates, we organize the group travel, the budget, everything, and we have no more than 12 spots available for guests. So it's small group travel with us as your full guides. So you driver, hiking guides, logistics coordinators, all of that.
Do you get mostly singles that will book into that?
No, we get couples, we get groups of, 3-4 friends, we get the one-off singles who are looking for something unique. So it's the whole gamut. Like we've had a group buy out a retreat because it fit. And then that leads me into the second offering is that we do custom tailored programs as well. So if we have a location that already exists in our library, you can pick the date, you can pick the group size, you can pick the budget, and then we tailor it based on requests. And then the third one is self-guided. So we'll send you an itinerary of like, here are the recommended places that we suggest you go. Here are the different places that you can stay based on group size. And then we offer different levels of host offerings within those last 2 programs. So my partner and I can go and be, at your beck and call, your guides, pick you up at the airport, all of that stuff, or the self-guided version where we're like, here's the personal driver's phone number. Here's a hiking guide we would recommend. Here are the restaurants and their phone numbers for reservations. So there's really 3 different buckets that we offer.
Curious because I have an idea in my head. I'm looking for validation here. If you can help me, what percentage of your clients do you think it's pretty even split, men, women, or is there a strong leaning either way?
There's not a strong leaning either way. People ask what our target market is, and it's quite difficult from a marketing perspective because to narrow down, to get really intentional about the messaging, we don't have a key demographic. So we have guests who come that are 23 years old, single women who want to come on this trip. And then we have a 56-year-old single man who is coming on a self-development trip while his wife and kids are home and he just wanted to go be active in a new place. Then we have a 73-year-old couple who's been on 4 of our different retreats in different locations. We have groups of 3-4 men in their 30s who are all new dads who want to go on a boys' trip. We have couples who are coming away for their anniversary trip but want to be a part of a group. And I mean, it's just all over the board.
Do you limit some of your group departure? Like, so for example, several of the folks I've had here on the show do women's groups. Like, this is a women's group. Mm-hmm. Do you do that? Like, will you publish one as a women's departure? Or you could obviously do a men's departure. I'm not trying to say only one or the other, but you do that. Okay.
Yeah, we have offered that specifically in the past where we've said, this is a women's only retreat down to Mexico. We're going to do a lot of, ceremonies that we want to just really focus on the feminine and have that kind of energy around. Mm-hmm. And then my partner has, plans in the works to do a men's only retreat, kind of going out into the wild and giving men a chance to meet new friends and try a lot of fun experiences that maybe they haven't.
Do you think you could tie this, or have you done this like a couples, like, because that's a whole nother avenue of couples retreats, right? And incorporate activities as well as, maybe Kundalini, is it Kundalini yoga?
Yeah, that's one of them as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I just was curious if because I think probably some guys might look at it and say, oh, yoga trip, I'm going on a yoga trip.
Yeah.
Which we've kind of already touched on. And there's a lot of stereotypes. I think that's why I asked the question was, I've got the stereotype in my head is it's the woman who wants to go on this trip that is looking at your website. Oh my gosh, this looks amazing. Come on, honey, we're going.
Yeah.
And he's like, are you kidding me?
Right.
Type of thing. But that's a stereotype. That's just a story.
It is, but it's also, there's some validation to it. So, now as the couples have been coming for a couple of years, now the men are much more geared to the specific destination. So we have a returning client. They're a couple who've been to 4 of our different retreats. And this year he's retiring. So he chose that he wanted to come to the Scotland retreat that we're leading because it's whiskey and hiking and the seas and all sorts of that stuff, even though he knows that he'll be doing some of the yoga as well.
All right.
But he got to choose where he went for his retirement experience, and he chose to come with us, which we're very honored.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, I think different look that kind of gets then into the more specifics of where do people want to go. And, maybe the Yucatan in Mexico is a lot more popular amongst women because we're doing salsa dancing and we're doing, cacao ceremonies and sunrise music on the beach and things like this. Whereas, maybe Norway speaks to men a little bit more, or Scotland, with that rich heritage of strong men, more of the masculine.
We're going to get together, wear kilts, and drink scotch, right?
Exactly.
To celebrate the masculine.
Yes.
We're very cool. Lindsey, is there we've chatted quite a bit. Is there anything else you want to leave with our listeners before we wrap up? Or do you think we've done a pretty good job setting the stage? Because the goal is that anybody listening to this, obviously has figured out by now that you're personable and smart and might be fun to travel with. They're going to have a link to the website so they can go do some look in there. But is there any kind of last minute or last things you want to say before we wrap up?
Just giving, I think, yourself an opportunity to try something new. And this is becoming more and more of a thing, but just a different kind of travel. So something that might not be so mainstream, might not be so comfortable based on, prior experiences or how trips and travel have been marketed for the last 2-3 decades. And really just, it's something wonderful for people who are curious about broadening their horizons and learning about the beautiful world we live in.
Which I like to think is our amazing listeners. It's the Big World Made Small podcast for a reason. Like we're making this, just by connecting and making the big world feel a little bit smaller. I guess I really should ask this though. Does somebody listening to this, do they have to know anything about, do they need to go warm up, get in shape at the yoga studio before they go on one of your trips? Or you can take someone that's never done yoga, never been in a yoga studio, and they won't feel like they're not going to be embarrassed. They're going to feel welcome 100%. In the group, right? Okay. I figured that was the case, but I thought we probably ought to say that. Just
And one
in
of our
case.
biggest taglines that I feel like I should mention is that even though it is a group trip, we encourage everybody to choose your own adventure. That's kind of our tagline.
Yep.
So we give everyone throughout the week like this itinerary. We don't give the itinerary, but we give them an offering of all of these different programs and activities that they can do with us throughout the week that we've vetted personally. We've done every single thing that we're going to offer our guests firsthand. And if somebody decides, you know what, I've tried yoga, I'm going to sleep in today and I'm not going to do any of the yoga, then they can skip it. If somebody chooses to stay in the hot tub and have a glass of wine rather than go on a hike, that's their holiday, their choice. So we provide all of these opportunities and kind of lay them out on like a charcuterie board of sorts and just say, take what you want, leave what you don't.
It's like those books, right? Again, this is, I'm a little older than you, but they had to choose your own adventure books, right? Where you could flip the page and you have to make a choice, and depending on your choice, it depended on the end result. But anyway,
it's an outcome. Yeah.
It's pretty cool. I did hear you say we don't give him the itinerary. I want to make sure is there something secret there? Is this a trade secret?
Yeah. So this is also something a little bit different. On our website, you'll see a list of inclusions that you're going to get to make sure people know that they're paying for something of value. But what we don't do is we don't provide an itinerary that says your day is going to go like this, your week is going to go like this. Because again, going back to what I'd said earlier, that year abroad was so freeing to me because I was in a flow state and just kind of like moving with what felt right and how things, if there was a torrential rain and I couldn't go rafting because the river was flooded, like the cubics were out of control, then I went on, this other experience instead. And so my partner and I have everything handled from a logistical standpoint, A to Z and backwards and forwards and everything else, but we don't show that to the guests. So every night at dinner, we have a tradition where the night at dinner, we talk about the next day's experiences. So that way, if you can see on the website that, whitewater kayaking is included, and that gives you excitement or nerves or, anxiety or whatever it is, you don't know when that's going to happen.
Yeah,
so you can't look past day 2, 3, and 4 and only focus on day 5 when we're going to go kayaking. You might wake up, or at dinner, know that tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. we're going kayaking. So now you can get your head around it. But you didn't miss out on the rest of the things from today because you were so preoccupied with tomorrow's experience.
I think that's really, really clever because people they tend to worry about certain things, and worry is a word. Like worry is the word. I had a hot air balloon ride business. I cannot tell you how many people get in the balloon and they were worried about the landing.
Yeah.
Like the landing is at the end of the flight.
Yes.
They're spending the whole flight worried about the landing.
Mm-hmm.
And because most people have never been in a balloon. The vast majority of people, it's the first time they've ever been in one. Yeah. And they think the landing is going to be horrible. And so what I used to do, because you can't just say, I'm not going to tell you if we're going to land. They know we're going to land.
Yeah.
But, I would take off. I'd take off. We'd fly around for 5 minutes or so. I'd come back down on the land.
Nice.
And say, okay, now you know what the landing is going to be like. You can relax and enjoy the rest of the flight. And then we'd take off again and we'd fly around a little bit more.
Oh, that's brilliant.
So it's managing expectations. And I love your approach because you probably have one of those niche businesses that you can get away with that. Yeah. A lot of other tour operators listen to this like, I wish. I wish I could do that. But if you have the word Zen in your name, then you might be able to get away with, we're just going to be in the moment.
Yeah, and chill out. And
don't worry about the future.
Right. And for most of our clients, men, women, family, singles, doesn't matter. We find that a lot of them plan everything, whether it's in the office for employees, for their families, for their children, for their friends, whatever it is. So they're always used to being like, where do we have to be at 2? Should we be in the car at 1:50? All of that stuff. Some people have become very ingrained in who they are and how they operate, which is great. But we want to give people this opportunity to be at like adult summer camp. Just trust your counselors that we got you and you're going to experience all these things. We're never going to forfeit an amazing experience for like a dinner reservation. Let's say we're going to push the dinner reservation. We're going to experience the sunset. We'll make sure you guys are fed, but this is where you need to be,
Love it. Love it. Sounds like what you're doing is pretty darn cool. So anybody listen to this, make sure, click on the link, go to your website, go to Lindsey's website. And Lindsey, thank you so much for taking time out of your day this is really, really, really interesting for me. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. All right. We'll work on some projects. I want to go do one of your trips.
Yeah.
We're going to talk some more. All right.
Sounds great.
Thanks, Lindsey. Appreciate you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Bye.
I trust you enjoyed listening to the conversation as much as I enjoyed recording it. If you're enjoying the Big World Made Small podcast, please take a moment to tell the algorithm by subscribing and posting a review so that others can benefit as well. I also invite you to take a quick trip over to bigworldmadesmall.com and join our private adventure travel community to receive new episode notifications, special access to our guest experts, and perhaps even some exclusive partner offers that we haven't discussed on the podcast. I'll publish another episode soon. Until then, keep exploring. It's the best way to make a big world feel just a bit smaller.